I want to be. I admit I've been a little bit trollish on social media today, rubbing salt in wounds. But I want to be reasonable and civil here, and some of you won't like it anyway. In the last 40 years, the conservative movement has been really open and transparent about what it was going to do. Roe versus Wade caused a backlash, and that backlash has been sustained for 40 years, and the conservative movement has now won. But it didn't win in a vacuum. It could not have won in a vacuum. It required conservatives as a whole to exercise power and votes at local and state levels to change legislatures, to change governors, to change presidencies, to change Congresses. For a very long time in this country, there was a bias towards the Democrats in the Electoral College. That bias has now shifted to the right. It's not a coincidence that you're only now hearing about how illegitimate the Senate is and how illegitimate the Electoral College is and how illegitimate the Supreme Court is now that they don't work to the Democrats' advantages. Over the last 40 years, as Republicans and conservatives have been building a conservative legal movement and an intellectual movement to tear down Roe v. Wade, the Democrats and the progressives have been embedding themselves within the media and within cultural organizations that set the tastes of the country and within the academy. They've been talking to themselves, and as Republicans and conservatives have had to learn to talk in a way to get the broadest possible reach to build a coalition that could move the Senate and the Electoral College in their direction, the Democrats during the same period have become more and more insulated and more unable to talk to, relate to, or understand people who disagree with them. And it all came to a head today with Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health. For 40 years, conservatives have been taking over the Republican Party. One could not get elected in the Republican Party at the national level without being pro-life. One could become president of the United States as a Republican and lose it all by not putting pro-lifers on the bench. And conservatives were burned by Souter and Anthony Kennedy and Sandra Day O'Connor in many respects, who leaned to the right, but not enough to get rid of Roe. The David Souter appointment by George H.W. Bush was a defining moment, orchestrated by John Sununu, who assured George H.W. Bush he would be right on life, and he became one of the most reliable liberals on the Supreme Court. So conservatives plugged away. In 2016, Donald Trump got elected. I didn't vote for the guy. I didn't think he would be really a conservative. He had been a pro-abortion advocate and a supporter of Planned Parenthood and even praised them on the campaign trail in 2016. And turns out Donald Trump is definitionally the most pro-life president America has ever gotten. I'm glad to be wrong on that point, and I'm glad he won, because we wouldn't have gotten today but for Trump winning in 2016. It would have eventually come, but it came sooner than a lot of us expected. I saw 2016 as a great setback. I just knew Clinton would win. Little did I realize that Americans actually shared my loathing for her. I assumed I was the anomaly and most Americans would put up with her, but nope. Most Americans hated her just as much as I did, rejected her for Donald Trump, a man I didn't much care for, but who was a great president. But we've been very open and honest about this the whole time. But along the way, as conservatives have had to broaden their arguments, to broaden their reach, to broaden their coalition, to expand their vote, Democrats have done the exact opposite. They've taken over the PR shops of major corporations. They've taken over the academy. They've taken over TV networks and newsrooms across America. And then they began talking to themselves. And because while they were doing this, they were also increasingly isolating themselves in urban enclaves and coastal palaces, they lost touch with everyone else. And by losing touch with everyone else, they forgot how to relate. Now they're left with angry voices on MSNBC who are telling you during tough economic times that you should shut up. It's actually better than you think, and you can go buy a battery-powered car. They're telling women who can't find formula, well, why aren't you breastfeeding, you selfish woman? Many women can't breastfeed. They've lost the ability to talk to anyone else, to relate to anyone else, to empathize with other people. They're in a bubble. There have been repeated surveys from Pew and from Gallup and from Ipsos and others that show a conservative is far more likely to know and be friends with a progressive than a progressive is to be friends with and know conservatives. Conservatives are far more able to articulate reasonably, honestly, and with charity the arguments of the left than the left can for the right. I can tell you why the left supports abortion rights, and if anyone on the left tries, they immediately descend into, well, Republicans just want to control women's bodies, which isn't true. They don't understand the arguments. They can't relate. They don't empathize. They don't sympathize. They don't know the people. This will change, of course. Events change things, and there's no such thing as permanence in American politics. But if you're on the left, you would do well to realize that those of us on the right, we're not your enemy. We're just your opponent. You would do well to realize we're not out to get you. We've been very open and transparent about what we wanted. We wanted Roe v. Wade ended and the issue returned to the states. And you would do well to realize that you have to build a coalition outside of like-minded people in order to win, which is what conservatives have done. It is not a coincidence, as I said, that for the decades where there was an electoral college and Senate imbalance in favor of the Democrats, you never heard anyone complain about the illegitimacy of those institutions. It was never in the media. The moment both started working against the Democrats, suddenly it's nonstop belly aching about how the Senate needs to go and the Electoral College needs to go because they're impediments to democracy. You never heard belly aching about the Supreme Court until it was too late for them, and the Supreme Court was decidedly a conservative majority. They were perfectly fine with the Supreme Court. What's really going on here is that over time, Democrats embedded themselves in institutions of power in this country, and while the conservatives could make inroads and win elections, the left still had the court. And now, though, the institutions that are most permanent in this country are controlled by conservatives, the courts. And the Democrats know what's coming in the legislature. And they don't control most of the states in this country anymore. For the longest time, Democrats controlled almost everything. And so the reactions we're seeing, the violence we're seeing, the hysteria we're seeing, and the rage we're seeing has a lot to do with Democrats finally recognizing that after 40 years, they're out of power. And hell is coming for them in November because they botched the economy. And there's not a lot they can do to stop it. They can hope Roe v. Wade will help them stop it, but it won't. And so what we're seeing is a profound reaction to a group of people who have become so insulated and told themselves they were it, they were the majority, they were the future, the arc of history bent in their direction, are now realizing that in the real world, the arc of history bent against them. And the people turned against them. And the Democratic institutions and the Republican institutions all turned against them. And so they can control the academy, and they can control the airwaves, and they can control the editorial pages, and they can control the Fortune 500. But the people have moved on from them, and those they can't control. If they want to get back to power, they need to learn, again, the skills of empathizing and relating to people who don't share their views and find a way to build a coalition with people who aren't like them. If they get those skills quickly, they'll come back to power. If not, they're going to wander in the wilderness as Republicans did for a very long time. It took 40 years for Republicans to get back the House and the Senate. Not only have they gotten back the House and the Senate and won the presidency more in the last 40 years than the Democrats, they've now taken over the Supreme Court because they were patient and they learned to communicate with people who didn't necessarily agree with them, and they learned to show those people that they are not each other's enemies. Progressives, you could actually learn from us.
I really do like his opinion on things.